My name is Stacy Oldham, and I'm 38 years old. For most of my adult life, I've lived with the understanding that my parents made their choice, and that choice wasn't me. It wasn't my kids either. They'd crowned my older sister, Heather, as their golden child long before I was old enough to understand what that even meant. And over time, they didn't just choose her, they built an entire world around her. Her kids, her life, her image. Meanwhile, I carved my own path, raising my two children miles away, both physically and emotionally, from the orbit of their influence. I worked, stumbled, learned, rebuilt, and eventually found something close to peace. A quiet life, small but ours. That peace shattered one Tuesday afternoon. It was nearly 4 p.m. I had just finished prepping dinner, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the kitchen, when my phone buzzed. I glanced over without thinking and froze. Mom, incoming call. For a moment, I genuinely thought I was hallucinating. My mother never called. Not unless she needed something. Not unless it benefited her, Heather, or Heather's perfect children. Certainly not for me. I didn't pick up at first. Not because I didn't want to, but because my hand wouldn't move. The last meaningful conversation we'd had been years ago. Holidays came and went with only the obligatory Merry Christmas or Happy Birthday text. Nothing deeper. Nothing that resembled family. But she kept calling, 3 times in a row. Something inside me tightened, so I inhaled, braced myself, and answered. "Stacy," my mother's voice burst through, sounding unusually bright, almost shaky with excitement. "We've been thinking, your father and I. We want to reconnect with the kids. It's been far too long. They're older now. It's time we make up for everything." Just like that, as if the last decade could be erased with a cheerful declaration. I didn't speak for a long moment. My stomach knotted and my pulse hammered in my ears. "Reconnect?" I finally repeated. "After all this time?" "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said with a laugh that scraped against me like sandpaper. "Families drift. But now that your kids are doing so well, we just feel we should be there again. Your father feels the same." There it was, the truth leaking through the cracks. My mother didn't even realize how she sounded, or maybe she did, and didn't care. She talked as though they'd been supporting us faithfully, as though her absence had been some mutual misunderstanding, as though she wasn't the one who once told me, cold, clipped, that my kids would turn out like their father, and that it was better not to waste resources on them. But now that Jake and Lily were thriving on their own, now they wanted in. I swallowed hard. "What exactly are you trying to say?" She hesitated, just for a beat. I could almost see her choosing her words, like she was arranging furniture, careful to place everything in the right spot. "We just want to make up for lost time," she said sweetly. "And, well, now that Jake is looking at colleges and Lily is winning all those awards, it would be nice to reconnect before they're too busy for us." I nearly laughed. Too busy for them? They'd never been part of the picture. My kids grew up without birthday cards from them, without weekend visits, without meaningful conversations. They grew up without the trust fund my parents quietly built for Heather's kids, money they flaunted openly, like a badge of superiority. But apparently, now that my kids were succeeding without a single handout, they were suddenly worth reconnecting with. I felt something hot, rage or grief, or both, burn under my ribs. "I don't know if the kids are ready for that," I said bluntly. There was a pause, then, "Well," she said sharply, the sweetness evaporating, "sometimes kids need to learn that parents make mistakes. It's time they move on." Move on, just like that. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a command. "You mean your mistakes?" I snapped before I could stop myself. Her sigh was sharp and irritated. "We're trying to help, Stacy." "Help!" I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. The kitchen felt colder afterward, quieter, and it took me a full minute to realize I was still gripping the phone, my hand trembling. I needed to talk to someone who actually cared, someone who had stood by me through every wound my family ever inflicted. Ethan, my boyfriend of 7 years, the man who showed up for my kids more than my own parents ever had, the man my mother had dismissed as not good enough, only to later gush over his success once he'd built his career. That evening, after dinner, Ethan and I settled on the couch. The house was unusually calm, Jake in his room gaming, Lily quietly sketching upstairs. I told Ethan everything. He listened the way he always did, focused, steady, with a quiet intensity that made me feel safe, even when the world wasn't. When I finished, he sat back and exhaled slowly. "That's Something, he said, eyebrows raised. How did you answer her? I told her the kids weren't ready, I said. Which is the truth. He nodded, jaw tightening. Good, because they don't just get to walk back in now that the kids are successful. That's not how family works. Hearing him say it, out loud, felt like someone was helping carry the weight I'd been dragging for years. But then he said something that threw me. Still, he added gently, we should talk to the kids. Let them know. It's their right to have a say. He was right. Of course he was right. But part of me wished he wasn't, because facing that conversation meant reopening old wounds. Later that night, I gathered Jake and Lily in the living room. They sensed the shift immediately. Kids are always quicker than parents think. Grandma and Grandpa called, I began. Jake rolled his eyes so hard it nearly made a sound. Lily sat up straighter, guarded. They want to reconnect, I continued. They're acting like they want to make up for lost time. Jake scoffed. Now, after ignoring us for years? It hurt, but not because of what he said. Because he was right. Lily bit her lip. Reconnect for what? Because they suddenly feel like it? Her voice wavered, but her eyes didn't. They see we're doing fine without them, Jake muttered. That's why. Silence settled over the room, heavy and fragile. You're not required to forgive them, I said quietly. You don't owe them anything. They looked at each other. A silent conversation passed between them. Jake spoke first. I don't want anything to do with them. Lily nodded slowly. Me neither. It felt like something inside me cracked, relief and sorrow colliding in my chest. Okay, I whispered. Then that's what we'll tell them. The conversation ended, but the ache didn't, because I knew this was only the beginning. My parents had made their first move, and I could feel, deep in my bones, that they weren't done yet. The days after that phone call felt strangely heavy, like the air in the house had thickened. Even when no one was talking about it, the tension lived in the corners of every room. I'd been trying not to think too hard, not to let old wounds reopen, but memory has a cruel way of pulling you back whether you want it or not. So I didn't fight it. I let myself remember. It had been nearly a decade earlier. Jake was around 10, Lily maybe 8, when I accidentally stumbled onto the truth that changed the way I saw my parents forever. I had called my mother to ask something innocent, something small. A school fee had come up unexpectedly, and though I wasn't expecting help, a part of me still believed she might offer, out of love or duty, or maybe even guilt. She didn't. Instead, she said something I've never forgotten, even when I desperately wanted to. Stacy, your children will turn out like their father. It's better not to pour money into something that won't yield much. Her tone was casual, like she was discussing milk cartons on sale, as if she had any right to decide the worth of my children she barely knew. I remember sitting in my car after that call, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand how a mother could talk like that about her own grandchildren. I remember staring at the grocery store sign across the parking lot and thinking, I will never let my kids hear that. I will never let them know how little she thinks of them. Later, weeks later, the truth about the trust fund came out. Heather, my sister, had let it slip without even realizing. Something about distributing withdrawals evenly among the kids. Her kids, of course, not mine. I asked questions. Quiet, direct. She avoided eye contact. My mother became defensive. My father stayed silent, which meant everything. Eventually, they told me the truth. They had set up a substantial trust fund for Heather's children since the day they were born. Vacations, tuition, any opportunity the world could provide. They were building a future for them brick by brick. But not for Jake and Lily. Not even a small account. Nothing. My kids weren't on the spreadsheet of their legacy. The memory still burns. And as the days passed, since my mother's sudden interest in reconnecting, that wound reopened itself like it had never healed. Ethan noticed. He always did. One night, as we folded laundry together, domestic, quiet, almost soothing, he looked at me in that way he does when he's worried, but trying not to make it obvious. You're thinking about it again. I can't help it, I admitted. It's all coming back. He tossed a towel aside and sat on the bed, elbows on his knees. You know it wasn't your fault, right? It doesn't feel that way. They made their choice. You didn't make them choose it. I swallowed hard. They think they can just walk back into our lives, into the kids' lives, after everything. His voice softened. They're not doing this because they've changed. They're doing it because they realized your kids don't need them, and that kills them. He always had a way of cutting through the lies, I told myself. But he wasn't wrong. My parents only seemed interested now that Jake was making honor roll, winning robotics competitions, getting early college program invitations. And Lily? She'd taken the art world of her school by storm, winning competitions left and right. My kids were thriving without a dime from them. And now, suddenly, they wanted to be involved. The next attempt from my parents came 2 days later, and this time, it wasn't a call. My mother and father showed up at Lily's school. The front office called me at work, my heart skipping a beat as I answered, fearing something had happened to Lily. But no, it was them, trying to surprise her, trying to visit as if they had ever been part of her everyday world. Lily had walked right past them, not even stopping. The receptionist said she looked overwhelmed, confused, upset. She kept her head down until she reached her ride home. When I got the call, I nearly left work in tears. Not because my parents had shown up, but because Lily had been forced into a moment she never asked for. That night at home, she didn't talk much. She went to her room early. Jake said nothing but slammed his door harder than usual. This wasn't reconnecting. This was invasion. Later, well past 10 p.m., my phone rang again. This time it was my mother, and her voice was softer. Too soft. "Stacy," she said, "your father and I, we aren't getting any younger. You know that." Manipulation. I reached for the light and remained sitting in the dark. She continued, "Your father wants to see Jake. He wants to introduce him to the business. Start mentoring him before—" She choked up, dramatically. I could almost hear her waiting for my sympathy. "Before what?" I asked, flat. "Before it's too late," she whispered. There it was. The guilt. The emotional chokehold she thought she still had on me. I closed my eyes. "I'm not pressuring my kids into anything to ease your conscience, I said. They're hurt. They're angry. They don't trust you." Silence crackled through the line. Then, cold, clipped. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I said. "I'm being a mother." I hung up before she could respond. Ethan found me sitting on the floor, phone in my hand, shaking. He said nothing, just pulled me into his chest. And for the first time in days, the tears came. The next morning, I sat Jake and Lily down separately, then together. I needed to know where they truly stood, not from anger, but from clarity. Jake spoke first, voice low. "Mom, they never cared about us. Not really. They had one chance when we were younger, and they blew it. Why do they think we want them now?" Lily nodded, hugging her knees. "It feels like they only care because we're doing well. It feels fake." Fake. Exactly the word I had been choking on for days. I reached for their hands. "I will never force you to forgive them," I said, "and I will never make you entertain a relationship you don't want." They both nodded, and I knew that was that. My kids had made their decision. Now it was time for me to make mine. The morning after Jake and Lily made their decision, I felt strangely calm. Not peaceful, but resolved. The kind of resolve that comes after surviving a long storm, when you finally stop hoping the clouds will go away and instead decide you're done waiting for sunshine. It was time to end this. My parents had called 7 times between midnight and sunrise. 7. And each voicemail was a mess of guilt, confusion, and that familiar tone of indignation, like I was the unreasonable one for protecting my children. By 9 a.m., I'd had enough. I stepped outside onto the back porch, the cold morning air sharp in my lungs, and dialed my mother's number. She answered before the first ring finished. "Stacy," she breathed, as though she'd been waiting beside the phone all night. "Thank God. We've been so worried." "Mom," I cut in, "stop. We need to talk." The shift in her tone was immediate. Her sweetness evaporated into wariness. That was the thing about my mother. She could feel when control was slipping from her fingers. "I told Jake and Lily what you said," I continued. "They don't want a relationship with you. They don't want fake apologies. They don't want guilt trips. They don't want to pretend you've been part of their lives." Dead silence. I pressed on, voice steady. "They're done, and so am I." Her breath hitched. "Stacy, you're being cruel." "No, I'm being honest." "You're tearing this family apart," she snapped. A bitter laugh escaped me. "No, you did that years ago." What followed was a stuttering mess of excuses. "We were busy. Heather needed us. You were so independent. Your children seemed to be doing fine. We didn't know what you needed." Every line a carefully crafted illusion. But I'd lived through the truth. And the truth was, they had chosen who mattered to them. And it wasn't me. It wasn't my kids. "We're done," I repeated, voice soft but unshakable. Before she could reply, I ended the call. I expected relief to wash over me. Instead, a hollowness settled in, an understanding that letting go of a painful family is still letting go. But the silence didn't last long. Not 10 minutes later, my phone lit up with a new name. Heather. Of course. My sister, the golden one. The star child. the one who had taken everything my parents could give, money, attention, validation, and built her entire identity on top of it. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then answered. She didn't waste time. "What the hell, Stacy?" Heather hissed. "Mom just called me sobbing. What did you do?" There it was, the entitlement, the misplaced outrage. I leaned back against the porch railing. I told them the truth. "That's rich," she snapped. "You've always been dramatic. They're trying to reconnect and you're shutting them out." "They ignored my kids for years," I said calmly. "They set up a trust fund for yours and gave mine nothing. Oh my God," she cut me off with a laugh. "Not this again." The dismissal struck a nerve so deep it felt like an old bruise breaking open. "You think you're the only one who struggled?" she continued. "You think everything was perfect for us?" "Yes," I said bluntly, "I do." She scoffed. "My kids deserved that trust fund. They were grateful. They had a plan. Yours, well..." "Don't finish that sentence," I warned. But she pushed anyway, a sneer in her voice. "Yours didn't exactly seem like they'd go far. Mom and Dad were just being practical." I froze. The words hit like a slap. Not because they were new, but because they were the spoken version of everything my parents had ever implied. "You haven't changed at all," I said quietly. "Oh, stop acting righteous," she snapped. "You're just jealous. My kids are thriving. They're successful. They're doing things that actually matter." Something inside me finally cracked. "Your kids are thriving because they were handed everything," I said. "Opportunities, resources, connections, handed. They haven't worked for a single thing." "How dare you?" "No," I pressed on. "How dare you? Pretending your kid's success is anything but the product of a checkbook and constant coddling." "You're delusional," she spat. "And you're terrified," I said, "because your entire identity, your entire family's identity, falls apart the second you admit that mine are doing well without them." Silence. A stunned, wounded silence. I could almost picture her face, eyes wide, mouth open, pride pierced straight through. "You want to know the truth, Heather?" I said. "Jake and Lily are the kind of people your kids will never be. Independent, driven, hardworking. And they learned that from living without your help. They became something despite everything, not because of it." "Shut up," she whispered. "You don't get to judge them," I went on, voice trembling with the weight of a decade of unspoken hurt. "You don't get to decide their worth. You don't get to rewrite the years you all spent ignoring them." She inhaled sharply. "You're tearing the family apart." I almost laughed. "The family was broken long before I ever fought back," I said. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm walking away from something that was already rotting." Another long silence. Then, in a voice small and vicious, she said, "You'll regret this." "No," I said, "for the first time I won't." And I hung up. The phone felt lighter in my hand than it had in years. When I stepped back inside, Ethan was waiting at the doorway, concern flickering across his face. "How was it?" he asked quietly. I exhaled slowly. "Final," I said. His eyes softened. He opened his arms, and I stepped into them without hesitation. Behind us, the house was warm. The hum of life lived with love, chosen and earned. Jake's laughter drifted faintly from upstairs. Lily's music leaked softly under her door. This was my family, not perfect, not wealthy, but real, present, better. And as I rested my head against Ethan's chest, I realized something. Sometimes the most brutal truths aren't the ones we hear from others. They're the ones we finally say out loud. And I had said them all.